Can you hear me all right? Perfect. Well, just wanted to say first and foremost here, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Zach Garvin. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a community event specialist here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Let's see here. A few things to keep in mind tonight. Once again, thank you for supporting us here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We're honored to bring you this kind of programming that offers a glimpse into the work of our, most definitely not simple, my goodness. I could not possibly. Anyway, thank you for supporting us here tonight, and we are honored to bring you this kind of programming that offers just a small glimpse into the work our science and conservation community does here at the museum. And please check out more programming just like this. For instance, our science lounges that happen every second Wednesday of the month at dmns.org. Casey Mallinckrodt,
Yep.
Thank you. Casey Mallinckrodt is our head conservator here at DMNS with experience working on a wide range of materials from contemporary chocolate sculpture to ancient Egyptian painted coffins. Her greatest interest, though, is with collections of material culture and using community collaboration, technical analysis, and cross-disciplinary research to deepen the understanding of these objects and to guide thoughtful stewardship. Please welcome Casey Mallinckrodt.
Thank you, Zach. And thank you all for being here. And suddenly, why does this happen? I walk to the podium and it goes off. All right. Is it back? Okay. This is what makes giving talks terrifying, is when it disappears. But and Matthew, maybe you could lower the lights, the house lights, just a little bit, so that people can see the screen better. Not that there's much to see yet. At any rate, thank you all for coming and welcome. And I hope that I will be able, during the course of the evening, to really share with you this wonderful project that we've been working on. A quick request. If you are inclined to take photographs of the screen with your cell phone, please don't take pictures of people, but the objects you're welcome to take images of. So over the course of this talk, I'm going to give an overview of the Beadwork project. I'm going to try to explain to you what moving through walls has to do with it, but really walking through the project, what the intentions and expectations were, how we implemented it, and what the course corrections were. This is really, I'm just telling you what you're reading right here, but what we accomplished, what we didn't accomplish, what we learned, what the impacts were, but really why this is important, why this is relevant. And then looking ahead to phase 2, because we've finished the first about 2.5, 3 years, and we're now heading into another phase. From the start, this project has been very intentional and very intentionally inclusive. So it's really important for me to recognize from the beginning that this is a group of individuals and organizations that have come together on this project. And they are the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. Cheyenne and Arapaho are 2 separate tribes, but they're federally recognized as one tribe, and they share tribal headquarters. Kiowa Tribe of Oklahoma, Texas Tech University, where our colleague Michael Jordan is on the faculty, First Americans Museum, fantastic, generous colleagues, and of course here at the museum with colleagues both within conservation and in our adjacent professions. An important start to any conversation, really it should be actually to any presentation, is a land acknowledgement. And I really feel very careful about these because sometimes they can be glossed over. But this is a really crucial part of Native life as well as all of our lives, where we live, the beauty and the history of these places. And the Denver Museum of Nature and Science actually does respectfully acknowledge that the museum not only sits on but digs into these lands that were traditional and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, and the Ute nations. 48 contemporary tribal nations historically have also been tied to this land and of Colorado, but they really live, people from here live all over the world, as well as the American Southwest, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains. I wanted to include the First Americans Museum land acknowledgement as well, because these tribal communities and the tribal lands are in Oklahoma, and much of what we did in the last year and a half was in Oklahoma, and I came to feel a great connection with the place and the people, and very grateful. Hi, Early Dawn. I want to run quickly through the timeline, and you are not seeing it yet. There we go. 2014, now one of our directors, but who was then the anthropology collections manager, Melissa Batchover, realized that she thought she was moving collections and reorganizing, and thought we have quite a beadwork collection here, and suggested that the museum have it evaluated. Mike Jordan, who we've been working with, was contracted to do that, and came back and said, yes, in fact, you do have a beautiful collection of Southern Plains beadwork with particular richness in the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and the Kiowa. That led to the beginnings of a book project. The pandemic came in and put that on the back burner for a while. But then something really quite extraordinary happened, and the museum received a very, very large gift to establish the Avenir Conservation Center. And it's hard to express the gratitude I feel for an institution such as the Avenir Center, the Avenir Foundation, that would actually commit so much to collections and to this kind of work. When I arrived, the gift had already been received, and a small group of us had the privilege of developing the concepts and the mission and the vision, and I particularly point to the highlighted text, decentering historical perspectives on ownership, care, and preservation, and partnering with originating and descendant communities, amplifying their beliefs and desires, and honoring diverse cultural protocols throughout all of our work. And this really has driven this project and other work that we're doing. We strive to achieve those goals. So as we developed the beadwork project, we had two kind of guiding incentives. One was to activate the DMNS collection of Plains beaded belongings, and the other was to partner with the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and the Kiowa communities to build this project. And we went to those communities, and but we didn't have a final set of accomplishments we were headed for. We went to the communities to say, this is what we're thinking. We would like you to be deeply engaged in getting what you want out of this. And you can see it had exhibition, a publication was there, hosting workshops to exchange information, engaging with beadworkers, not beadworkers, but bead specialists who could guide us in understanding, and if there were any conservation treatments, on working on those. We wanted to have paid internships and to have study days and opportunities for people to see and explore the collection. And I just have to point out this extraordinarily beautiful dress is now on exhibit on the second floor, which unfortunately you can't see this evening, but you can come back and see it. It comes back at the end of the talk. So we went, not all of us, but representative samples went to Oklahoma and on five meetings with communities. This particular one was at First Americans Museum, and otherwise they were out in more rural parts of the state where it was easier for members of the community to get there. And those ideas were presented. And out of those discussions came these directives, these goals. So that we would bring belongings to Oklahoma, and those would be chosen by members of those communities, not us, not the curators here, but people from those communities. We developed a partnership with First Americans Museum, and it was through that relationship that we reached out to the tribal leadership to really ask for and receive their endorsement to do this project, and to have members of those communities kind of assigned or approved to work as partners with us, to host workshops that would allow people to have experience with the whole range of manufacture. So starting after the actual hunting of the animal, which is an important part of this, but not one we felt we could be involved with, the brain tanning, and then moving from there to making something a garment, or leggings were the first ideas for that, and the beading. Create host interviews and create internships that would be not just one student or one learner at a time, but I came at this with a pretty conventional idea about it, and then Heather Aton, who's the director of curatorial affairs at FAM, turned to me in a conversation, and she said, "Casey, do you know how to protect these people, these young people in the museum?" And I thought blithely, well, yes, I did. I think so. And of course, I was completely wrong. I have no cultural knowledge. I have no internal knowledge of what that experience is. And thanks to Heather, we shifted it into the idea of a cohort with an elder or someone with a lot of cultural knowledge and language knowledge who could build this, a group of people who could feel safer and be really much better informed than any of us could have helped them be. Our conservation objectives were to learn how belongings are cared for in the community historically, and to guide our practices and exchange information, and then to engage people who are actually beading. This is a really important part of many people's lives, as the image shows. This was taken by our photographer, Rick Wicker, at the Black Legging Society gathering 2 summers ago, and he had the approval he was with a couple of colleagues, and the approval to photograph these contemporary beaded belongings and regalia. So the next step was to invite members of the community to Denver, to the museum, and have this cohort pick a suite of pieces that would go to Oklahoma. And that was 45 pieces, and that was pretty much determined by the space that First Americans Museum had for us to have our items housed in their beautiful, very new, temperature and humidity controlled storage area. And this, I have to, there are so many nods to so many people, but our collections staff or colleagues pulled many, many items so that people could see as many of these. As you probably know, museums have so much more than is actually seen. Things are in storage, and they're in storage for years and years, and they really tried to bring out as much as possible so that the community members could choose what was, most important to share with the community in Oklahoma. And this is our group. And I've listed everybody, but I also wanted to note that our teen science scholars were able to participate and meet the community members and learn from them how they were talking about these items and have meals together. And that's a summer program we have that high school students can apply for. And it's particularly focused towards students at schools that have less robust science programs to really give them some added resources in learning science. They're amazing, of course. They're brilliant and wonderful. So the next step is the conservation component, and before anything goes out of a museum on loan or to a residency, whatever it is, the conservation does a complete assessment. So we examine, we do digital imaging, both on the macroscopic level and, as you'll see in a couple of slides down the road, how we document. We do some analysis depending on what the objects are or the belongings are, and we document thoroughly. Before I go on with conservation, though, I want to recount a conversation I had with Terry Greaves and her sister and her niece, Jordan Poorman Crocker, who's the curator of Indigenous art at the Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. They were at the museum looking at beaded materials. Terry Greaves is a very highly accomplished and quite wonderful artist who uses beads, beadwork, traditional beadwork as her mode of manufacture, but she works in both worlds. She really is not isolated in the art world and I guess that's it, a full stop. But I came and joined them, that we were down in collections, and I'm really sorry I didn't get a picture of collections, because it is this large space with double-decker cabinets, and they are, it's compressed storage, so there is a lot of material there. And they were going through these items that they were interested in learning about, and I was introduced, and Terry then, when she had a moment, pulled me aside and very politely, very graciously took me to task for the way conservators and museum professionals have behaved in the past, particularly conservators who have, speaking of moving through walls, have put up walls between the belongings, the objects, these collections that we have stewardship over but are really not of our culture, or we don't understand them, really. We don't have the connection to them. But these barriers were placed up. You can't handle it. If you do, you have to wear gloves. You can only see it when we bring you this one piece at a time out at this table. And not respecting the inherent value of, not value in the sort of the monetary sense, but the cultural, the held, the experiential value of any belonging for what it carries forward, of the people who have made it, who have worn it, of what happened in that unknown space between it leaving its home and its owners and coming to the museum. So I told her I agreed, but also was reminded, in the same way I was by Heather Atone, I don't know. So I really need to learn to step back and listen repeatedly. And it's really hard because, ooh, it's so nice to have the authority over what happens. Another aspect of this cradle board was the discussion about the area that's circled in red where there's a loss. And these three very thoughtful women said, the artwork, the mastery that went into this is so great that I'll put it another way, it should be seen as a whole thing, not as damaged. It's disrespectful to the process and to the making. And we had then a very interesting conversation about who would do that and how we would do it, and we were very much in agreement. Conservation ethics demand or require, happily, that everything we do is either reversible or retreatable, and that everything is very extensively documented so that you know exactly, anyone in the future will know exactly what was done, how to reverse it, what the materials were, why they were chosen. So that was a point where we could come together, and I went forward thinking, I've got a lot to learn, and we need to be respectful and treat the items that are damaged. And just a couple of examples of difficult decisions that were made. This cradle board, the lining was replaced by someone here at the museum, and it was a strange decision to me, and one we wouldn't make now. Apparently, the interior lining was quite worn. It carried all the memory of the wear and the use, but it was torn in some places, and so it was taken out and thrown away, and then this textile put in. And there was a real effort to be thoughtful. It was a textile that would have been manufactured at the turn of the last century, which would have been appropriate, except that it was really inappropriate to do that. And none of that original textile was saved, and we don't have images even of what was underneath and what the wear was, what the life was that was represented in that. And then one more sad story, and then we'll get off to better things, or we'll get off to the work. This pair of moccasins was exhibited in Crane Hall, NAICH, Native American Indigenous Cultures Hall, and that's being deinstalled, which is a very interesting conversation, and we really don't have time for that, or we'll be here till 10:30, and it's not my story to tell. But if you look at the bottoms, the moccasin bottoms, you'll see that on the soles, holes were cut. And this was to accommodate the mannequin posts so that it could be installed. And there are so many things that are wrong about that, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but the mount is not the important thing. And these cuts were made through the memory of the foot that's embedded in the bottom of this moccasin. And this is an example of the kind of treatment that really makes someone like Terry Greaves speak out to conservators and say, you have to protect. Your job is to protect, and that is our job, to protect and preserve in the best way, and often that's not doing anything. Interestingly, you can see there are also holes that were cut into the toes, cut in, but sort of where it would be between the big toe and the second toe if you had a sandal thong in there. They're very intentional cuts. We don't know what those are. They happened before these were acquired by the museum. And for all those reasons, we wouldn't do anything about them, but it's certainly a point of curiosity, but nothing we would change. Where in another situation, a conservator in another situation might say, oh, well, we want this to look perfect, so we're going to fill this in some way. On with that. So this is documentation of this pair of moccasins, just to give you a sense of how we document things so we can come back and see them at any point and compare the condition. And we always use a color target so that we can adjust the color and compare for any color change. I included this as an example of the degree of conservation need that was probably not typical, but somewhat characteristic of things that had damage that went to Oklahoma. We didn't send anything that would have been destroyed or further really damaged by handling, but there were very few things, happily, in that category. But we did include things that that I would say I made the assumption that we would actually realize our ambition to have things treated while we were in Oklahoma. So let's wave the red flag of assumption there and tell you that that didn't happen as part of phase one. That was a course correction that's going to happen later. This is a condition report, a few pages from one of my colleague, Ella Thomas, who's here in the front row, and without whom this project wouldn't have happened. Just to give you a sense of the kind of documentation that's done that we can have in the record and also share with people who are examining these objects, belongings, excuse me. We do some analysis, non-destructive analysis of anything unless we have permission or have a project that's clearly defined. And then say if it were something that was under our stewardship, but really of another culture, we would collaborate with that community to build a plan. But in this case, we were testing for glass deterioration. And if glass is made with an imbalanced formula for a variety of reasons, it is susceptible to deterioration because of a change in the structure that's caused by water. And I won't go into that. I took that slide out. I wanted to keep it in. But you can see an image on the right showing how the glass spalls off, and it becomes very alkaline, and it's a syndromatic disorder of glass that becomes worse as it progresses. So we tested all of the objects for glass deterioration. What Ella's doing is putting down a piece of pH indicator paper. If the pH is high, we know that it's probably problematic. And a presence of crystals also tells that. Another kind of non-destructive analysis we do is XRF, X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. Ella is getting a thumbs up from back rows. This is a really great instrument for identifying elements, and particularly mercury and arsenic, which are residual on many organic materials that have been housed in museums. They were applied as pesticides, and they're very persistent. So we want to identify them so we can guide people in handling them and guide ourselves in handling them carefully. There's also lead and bromine on a lot of things. Those are, from current studies, appear to be residual from atmospheric pollution from the lead from leaded gasoline and the bromine from fertilizers. I look to a friend in the front rows who can help me with that later. So, then after conservation, off to collections. Collections does a huge amount, And talking about moving through walls, that orange wall behind my colleague Johnny goes right through to the conservation lab. So that's one wall we have to kind of pass through without, we'd love to be able to pass through without walking onto the hall, but it's okay, it's close. They soft packed everything. Soft packing is putting things in cardboard with depression mounts and secured in place so they could then be put in crates to travel to Oklahoma. They contracted for the construction of the 4 crates. They scheduled safe shipping with an art shipping company, and also arranged for members of the communities, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Kiowa communities, to come in and bless the belongings before they traveled, which is part of every transition for these belongings was blessed. This is a picture of one of the 4 crates, and this is some packing of a cradle board and some women's leggings. So off they went to Oklahoma and landed at the First Americans Museum. I can't tell you how great that was. I can't tell you enough how great that was, and if you haven't been there, it's a wonderful museum. It's they have small rotating exhibits, and then they have a long-term loan, which has some rotations in it from the Smithsonian, and they've worked in collaboration and have a really beautiful presentation. Once the belongings arrived in Oklahoma, they were blessed. Then my colleague Kat Martin and I went down and we unpacked everything, checked the condition of it, and laid things out sequentially so members of each community could come, again, examine and view and choose out of those 3 items from each group that would be exhibited at First Americans Museum in an installation. So that was chosen by community members and then curated by our colleagues on your far right, Marianne Guadal Parker and John Hamilton, who are assistant curators at the museum. And they put together this very beautiful show. I'm jumping ahead a little time-wise because it made sense the way I'm telling the story to you. That was over last summer, from the end of May until the end of September. And Mike and I were fortunate to be there for a panel discussion about the project. This is the installation. And we've been trying to figure out how many people we touched in the course of this project. We don't know how many people actually saw this who came to the museum. We can find out from the museum how many people visited during that time, but we don't have that specific data. We're actually in I'm again going to jump ahead. One of the things we're doing now is putting together surveys that will go to people who participated in the project to find out, to get feedback about the good, what wasn't so good, how we could do a better job in the future, how we can work with them in an ongoing basis. So the first phase of activities that happened in Oklahoma was a series of sharing sessions. These were 3 days for each of the communities, and the model was 6 people per meeting, so that because we had the approval to record those discussions. The goal was really sharing information and bringing together a suite of people from the communities who could have, first of all, get access to the belongings and study them and handle them. And then for us to ask questions. Again, it really wasn't intended to be an extractive process. There are a lot of things we would like to know about these belongings because they were acquired, many of them acquired by Mary and Francis Crane, who were the primary collectors who gave the Native American collection to the museum. But they bought from dealers and from trading posts and from gift shops in hotels, and which were all reliable but not necessarily factual in the information that we have about the promenades. And we know nothing about what happened in between. That is not told as part of that story. One thing I wanted to tell you about as well, some very interesting moments of learning. We would start the morning always with our community colleagues having a prayer. We would introduce ourselves, we'd have some coffee and donuts, and we would each have a chance. Mike would explain the project, I would describe the conservation issues and the handling issues. And one woman said to me, well, I've spent my life being told not to handle things that are of the deceased and that we don't know the history, that this is not safe. And then another colleague, Fred Mosqueda, who is our colleague through the Arapaho community, responded to her rather than, and my response was, we're not asking you to touch them, we're just making that option available in the safest way possible, but it's not forced in any way a requirement. But then Fred said to the group, well, we've all taken precautions, we've danced, or we've been through a process that makes this safer for us. And I don't mean to speak out of turn because I don't know what that was, but it was a very important learning moment for us about not just thinking, oh, great, now we're bringing these things and everybody can handle them. There is always so much more. It's yet another wall to pass through of knowledge and understanding. But there was a lot of learning in the process. And one particular thing that I wanted to share is, you can see this really beautiful dress and these leggings. Well, there are a few things I want to share from this slide. One is the comment that almost every conversation started with, and we would bring out one or two items at a time, belongings at a time, depending on what people wanted to see. We might bring all the cradle boards or, all the leggings, but it was really up to the people visiting or who were part of this session. They weren't visiting, we were visiting. But the constant comment was, so much love went into this. This person was so loved. And this was just another way of thinking. It wasn't, how's it made? I mean, that's all part of it, is how is it made, and look at the beading. But really, first off, how much love and attention went into this, and how much life is being carried forward in this. And it's a very different way of thinking than museums conventionally think. And I'm thinking again of a conversation, Jean, Ruben, you and I were having earlier, that the people who understand the belongings in a museum, the collections, who have a connection that's deeper than just learning about it, are people we need to bring into this museum, and all museums, with authority to curate and be conservators and set up the guidelines for stewardship. Some interesting things we did learn. I mean, as I said, it wasn't extractive, but it was fascinating. The presence of the deer skin left at the top of the moccasin with the fur on as a manifestation of the animal that's actually embodied. And then in this garment, the triangular areas at the bottom of the arms are kind of representative of the animal, the legs of the animal that was sacrificed and tanned and beaded to make this garment. And the same was true of comments about the skirt, that the tabs at the bottom there are two on each side, because it's a hide on each side, that leave the memory of the animal that is part of that. There's also a question about what's ours to know and what's not ours to know. And on this dress, there are small bags of, say, medicine, for lack of a better word, on both sides, these two bags. And there are things, I don't know what's in those. If it were requested, I could help find out. But there's material, there is history, and there's knowledge that's not anybody else's to share. And we really tried to make room to leave the room, to let people talk privately. We also started our conversations with, if this should be with you in your community, please tell us, because we'll start the work to return it and repatriate it, my favorite term. Again, looking at belongings, looking at the way they're made, use, the repairs of use, as opposed to something that was done in a museum for a practical exhibition reason. I really like this little patch, as it does the trick. This is a slide I can talk way too much about, but I will restrict myself to talking about the fact that the bag and the moccasins both have teepee imaging on them, but very different. So an example of the fact that everybody comes with their own personal manifestation of their interest and their tradition and their practices and their learning. The moccasins on the right, we actually know the maker, Marianne Kanish, and that they were made in Anadarko, or they were purchased in Anadarko in 1960. And this is really rare. I can't think of another item in our collections, Ella, can you, that we know the maker of the things that went to Oklahoma?
Yes, there was the small beaded figurines were made by.
Oh, right.
Escaping me, but I'll figure it out.
That's okay. That's why Ella is so valuable in our everywhere. And then this bag is fascinating because neither the Cheyenne or the Arapaho was kind of, I think, characterized as Cheyenne, and then it moved over to Arapaho. That was this, like, we don't really know, and someone made this, and it's a very interesting bag. It's rawhide, and it's the lower leg, the skin of the lower leg of the deer, including the dew claws, which are the two kind of little horn-like structures that are on the back. And it's been a bit ravaged by insects at some point in its life, so a lot of the keratin is eaten off, but it's kind of a fascinating object. And interesting, because again, it's a very personalized piece. There are no pat answers. There is a very interesting connection we learned to ethnology, anthropology. That's a very fraught history with Native Americans and a lot of indigenous communities around the world, and a lot of people, women, goes on and on. But there was particularly one day when the people that we had invited, who came in from the Cheyenne community, had a document that was written by an ethnographer many years ago who had documented things that were kind of lost from practical knowledge. And I think everyone knows, and if not should know, that it is really hard to maintain your culture if there's a big effort to exterminate it, and if your belongings are being taken or you are under duress to sell them. And that's happened a lot, and a lot of things were lost in that course of that process. And it was really interesting to see that, and I think it was Vanessa Jennings who spoke out and said, although she's Kiowa, so that wouldn't have been that day, saying we have to be mindful of the fact that there's some really great information that we don't have that we can really use. And I found this document online, which I found kind of fascinating. It's from 1901, American Museum of Natural History, the American anthropologist, that had these really lovely drawings of Arapaho moccasin patterns. And in fact, the one that I've showed you that's in our collection is very similar to the middle lower one. I'm preemptively answering a question of where the beads came from. They were all trade beads and purchased. They're not made in the United States. They were introduced in the 1600s, probably a little earlier, and by the mid-1800s had really traveled into the West. These bead cards are downstairs. They're fascinating. This is a Kiowa boy's shirt, and it's fascinating because it's so beautiful and interesting with these triangular panels. There's one in the front and the back and the tassels, but also there are copper coils around the tassels at the shoulders. They're now just on the underlayer, I think. I'm looking to Ella because she did the report for this. But Ella did the XRF analysis to determine that it actually is copper. It's darkened now, but when it was newly wrapped, it would have been quite shiny as someone was dancing. So the next phase of the project was to take things to the community, and to have the beading workshops. And you can see from the map that we were well west of Oklahoma City, and these are the towns that we went to. And the Amanda Hill and Fred Mosqueda and, I'm sorry, I'm getting my names all wrapped around in my head, and Chester Whiteman, all were very emphatic that we take things out to the community, because these are small towns. A lot of them have suffered from a lot of economic decline in the last 20 to 40 years, and they don't get the resources. And it's really a lot harder for people who are living rurally, for the people who are elders in the community to come even to Oklahoma City. So we did take the suite of items from each community, we took out to those communities for 2 days, and then each of those days we had a beading workshop. So I'm gonna go ahead and you can see that shirt again, this shirt again with a young man from the Kiowa community who's in the Kiowa language class. And this is an image of some of the people who came to visit, and Ella did these great posters so that we could circulate information beforehand. I'm going to move on to the next slide just so that I can give you a little bit more context around this. We placed all the belongings out, and we had the beading workshops. There was a new beading workshop each day, so we quite compressed down from the idea of coming from tanning a hide to making an entire garment. It was really, we provided all the materials for someone really to start and to learn some beading technique and to go away with the materials they needed to complete something. But this was yet another reality check or course correction in the process of our ambitions being really tremendous. But the distance between Denver and Oklahoma is sufficient, significant, and it really would have involved kind of another level of engagement and being in Oklahoma to organize those. On the other hand, this was really a great beginning. And here you can see that Lawrence Spottedbird, who's the Kiowa tribal chairman, came, and the language class, but also the people from the elder community, the Head Start kids who were kind of the best because they were really little. And they were so enthusiastic, and everybody's favorite color is rainbow, just in case you're wondering. And then there was a man who, as an example, called in sick. He's a teacher, called in sick for the day and got his daughter out of first grade and brought her over. And that was really emblematic of the difference it makes if you just get to go down the block or drive across town to see things and to spend time with them and to handle them. So I feel we really moved things through several walls to make that possible. This is the beading workshop on this side with Jess Bohe teaching. The second day was taught by Jolene Beartrack, and these are both very active bead artists and regalia makers in the community. The second group that we'd had 2 days with the Kiowa, the second 2 days with the Cheyenne. The first day was in Watonga at the Lucky Star Casino. And casinos are very interesting components of all of American culture, but in these areas they can provide a lot of economic resources, and they're very easy to get to in that they're very central and there's parking and you know what's there, and they were very supportive of us. This is the room where we laid out the belongings for people to come and see, and this is Ella showing 2 of the security guards who took time off during their break to come and examine the items and talk with us and take a look at what was happening in the beading workshop, which is going on in the adjacent room. And as I said, we provided all of the materials, and people were able to get as much as they could done in that day. This is the Emergency Response Center, or ERC, in Sealing, Oklahoma. And this is, again, in a fairly rural part of the community. And an example of why it was really important to come to these communities. One of the people who taught the class, and that's Dana Buffalo Meat, who's in the first picture to the left, was very involved in making sure that this building happened. And she was also very involved in making sure that there were bathrooms with showers in that space. And she was very generous in explaining that that was because the other community center in Sealing was historically not welcoming to Native community members. And the people of the town really needed to have that facility. And it was shocking and stunning, but it also reinforced the value of, in yet another way, of coming to those communities and bringing these items out and having these classes. Another very nice thing that happened was that people would bring their own beadwork, and this is Dwight White Buffalo, and I think that this, we talked about this in a meeting. He is a very, he was the 5-time national champion fancy dancer, and this is a competition that goes on, continues, and then here's this great picture of Dwight from, I think, 1990, but also he was, early Dawn, can I tell the story about him? His early Dawn Roy's mother was in college with him, and he was practicing all the time. So there was this thundering sound of this man practicing his fancy dance. But he's very gifted and very generous and thoughtful and so engaged in what we were doing and sharing his work with us. Another act of sharing that's very important in the picture of Dana Buffalo Meat is that she brought the beading samples from her grandmother. And that's a very, is a very precious thing to share. And our colleague Mike had interviewed her previously and she'd asked not to take any pictures or show any images of those beading samples because they were private to her family and to her. But in this case, she brought them and shared them with the community members who came to participate. And I hope that it was out of a feeling that, yes, this is in our community for our community. And even though I'm showing you this at a glance, I really hope that you can't see the details of that. But she's a very powerful presence and very clear and generous. So our next visits were to the Arapaho community centers, and again, just as a reminder, we're getting up every morning, packing the car up, and I'm sorry that Ella has a great picture of the back of one of the two mini our SUVs that we rented, packed with these boxes. We would drive them out, set them up, and then drive them back in the evening, which was actually really fun, but it was an interesting process of going out into the landscape and bringing these back. So this lovely bag on the right you'll be able to see because Ella's going to take them out after the talk, but we have brought some items that went out to Oklahoma for you to see out in the open area after the talk. And this is the CNA ERC, which is Cheyenne and Arapaho, recently built this beautiful facility. You can see we had the beading class at one end and the items out for examination and display at the other end, and just open for people to come. It was of all ages. The picture on the right, the woman with the part in her hair brought her 2 sons so they could start making their own regalia. But it was really people of all ages, and we had to limit the number of people who could attend the classes. And everyone who participated was really deeply involved. And the instructors went to a lot of trouble to prepare very carefully. On the picture on the right-hand person with the scarf on her head, Alex Cartwright, is the bead artist who taught the class the second day, but she was very busy all day when her father was teaching this class, preparing everything so people could actually move ahead as quickly as possible on the day of her class. And this is an image of someone's work area. This is the ERC building the emergency response building in Geary, Oklahoma. not on the beaten track. And again, and this was some of the people who were involved in this group, which shows the range of age. And this woman came with her husband, and they wanted to learn how to make regalia for their kids who were just getting to the age where they could start dancing, powwows. And so they were, like, everybody was deeply committed to what they were doing. It was really fun and focused. And meals were always a part of this process. And I've had a bit of a learning curve on that as well. We would buy donuts, or we would, in one instance, bought sandwiches from Subway, or purchased lunch from the casino. But both of the Arapaho days, it was both Cheyenne and Arapaho Day. No, just Arapaho. I'm looking for my specialist, who has a much better memory than I do. But Fred and Chester's families prepared food for us and brought it over, and then we prepared some of it in the kitchen. And this picture shows you the best fry bread that's ever been made, ever. I just want you to know. But it was so, and as Fred said to me when we were talking about planning, he said, this is what we do in our community. We make food and we share food. We come together, and that's part of what it is. And they had told people in the community if they didn't have to participate, they could come over and join us for lunch as well. And it was a good lesson to me. I mean, I'm grateful to support people who are working at the Subway in, a small town, but I love to cook for people, and I think it would have been a really wonderful way of engaging those communities to be a little bit more present. So that was the end of that session, the work in Oklahoma. Except for packing things up, we deinstalled the exhibit at First Americans, and now I'm getting to time. Sorry. And this is Ella and our colleague Johnny repacking things. We wrapped everything in plastic because we moved them in and out of the museum so often, and the ERCs, that we kept the doors open, there was a possibility that insects might have come and gotten in. So we wrapped them very carefully to make sure if there were any insects, there wouldn't be cross-contamination, and prepared them to go. And then our colleagues at First Americans arranged for the items to be blessed before they were then shipped back to Denver. They arrived in Denver and first went to History Colorado, primarily because History Colorado has a walk-in freezer with room for us to put all of the items in there. So we were able to freeze everything for a week. But as soon as they got to Denver, we opened the crates up and opened the boxes, and they were blessed to bring them back safely to Denver. And I'm very grateful for our colleagues who were willing to make the time to do that, to support this project. And then we put everything in the freezer, and now it's back here. Most of it is in collections again. As I said, we're hoping to, and maybe I told this to somebody earlier, one of our next steps is to bring the community, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Kiowa communities in Denver to the museum, or go to their community centers, whatever the community decides, so that we can share these belongings in the same way that we did, and in new ways, make them available. One thing that has happened is, as I mentioned, this beautiful dress is now on exhibit upstairs. If you know the museum, if you're coming towards the west atrium, there's kind of a glass wall, and it's right in front of that. There was a beautiful Navajo or Dene dress there from about 6 months, and then we put in the Kiowa dress just at the beginning of January. And our colleague from Kiowa, our partner in this, Amanda Hill, also agreed to curate this installation and chose this dress. She chose the leggings, which you actually saw in a slide, which I doubt you're going to remember, but of me looking at them under a microscope. They are now installed, but when we started looking at images of the belt, the plan changed, and a Kiowa belt is, and I will ask for any corrections if I'm saying this wrong, but there are 3 beaded beaded bags that are part of that. And one has a strike a light, or a way of starting a light, an awl, and a small knife. That's what a Kiowa woman traditionally carries. And this is, as I've learned along the way and learned from Amanda. And the belt has conchas, but it also has a drag, which is a vertical kind of concha belt that often has rectangular pieces on it. And Amanda and I were talking about this, and she said, you really, you don't know where those bags have been or who they belong to. This, again, you're kind of exposing something you don't know about. You should really commission this from someone who is a contemporary regalia maker. And so, happily, I went from that phone call to talking to the director of our division, Michelle Coons, who said, yes, of course we should. And by that afternoon, Amanda had identified someone, so we commissioned her to do this and got the belt in time to put it on, the garment. And also, I was talking to Amanda again, saying, I need your help. How do I tie the leggings, and what's the proper way to dress the mannequin? And she said, you really need somebody from the community to do that for you. And she contacted Cheryl Kozad, who is is an extraordinary person with great knowledge and experience, and she was willing to come in with her husband, Andy Kozad, and she brought in her belt, which she's wearing in this image, as well as her mother's, and described to me how I needed to put the belt on the mannequin. We hadn't received it at the time. It hadn't been shipped yet from Oklahoma, so I was given that instruction. But it was, again, this wonderful act of let's do this the best way we possibly can and really hand it over to the community to make the decisions about what is really of the communities. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and I'm really grateful to have been able to work on this project. And our next phase is bringing the community here, building that learning cohort. The conservation treatments, we're going to be building probably an internship around that, but making it a project. Transcribing the recorded sessions, a publication, which will be kind of a catalog of those items that were part of this project, but that were, but also really figuring out how to have the voice of that publication be from the community. And then I'm saying rotating exhibit. I know we have to stop. You're being very, okay. No, I thought I was getting, so otherwise I should stop. I would like to say rotating exhibitions, but we're going to hold off on that S for now. And with that, I'm going to thank you all so much for being here, and with these images and this quote from someone I admire a great deal, who really inspires thinking about, particularly for me as a conservator, how my work can be a conduit for making these intimate connections with history and people. So thank you so much. And we do have a second and a half for questions. And then there are objects outside. Okay. Oh, we have so much time. Well, so I welcome any question. So thank you. And you can also just go out, and Ella's out there with the belongings, which is really the fun part. So, yes.
That picture on the left in the lower left-hand corner,
Yes.
that's a cradle board that you're holding?
Yes, it's a miniature cradle board.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, I believe it's out with our items, and they're, we have a suite. We actually have quite a number of these really wonderful miniature cradle boards that were made as, I can't say toys particularly because I don't know, but made for young people, for little people. Oh, and you have the cube. We have this microphone that can be tossed around, quite literally.
Yeah, we're going to try and make it not dangerous. But, yeah.
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
So my other question is, the people who participated in the workshops took home the beading to complete or
Complete.
finish or whatever, are they going to have the opportunity to come back together and show what has been accomplished?
I don't know. And that's one of the questions we have for these various groups is how this carried forward. Was this a one-touch, or how can we move it forward? And, I feel very grateful to have been able to do the things we did, but I also see the amount of time that those belongings, they were in Oklahoma for 10 months. They were not in the hands of the community for very much of that time, actually. And that, as one of my colleagues said, many of these things have not been seen for 50-plus years. But, getting the intention and the reality to align is a big part of the many learning curves we've had in this project. But it's a good question, yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
all
good.
right.
Younger.
Now, here's the question. Do you want me to toss it, or do you want to toss it? All right, here you go.
Oh, bad throw.
Terrible throw. There you go.
Hi.
How do you preserve some of the stuff?
That's a good question. One of the really important things is to keep the temperature at a certain level, so around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and keep the relative humidity, so how damp it is in the air, around 50%, or it's actually lower here. Just a little clue about that set of numbers. That was developed by the British in London. So they were dealing with a whole different set of parameters. We always have a slightly lower relative humidity, but it's actually, for the most part, dry is better. It keeps insect growth down, mold, all of this. And these numbers are really designed to keep everything below that threshold. And we don't handle things very much. So for instance, as we invited others to handle items, no one here is invited to handle anything that's out there. So, but it is attentiveness to how things are made, looking carefully, say if you need to pick something up, and knowing what might happen, thinking in advance about that. So. But I think you should become a conservator, actually, I think. Ashley?
Which way?
Well, I was seeing this one, but whatever. You're the arbiter of the
We'll go
mic.
here. We'll go here. I'm standing over here, right?
Can I talk into the box?
Yes.
Casey, can you talk about the colors? I'm fascinated with the color palettes and how they work, and then also the color of the hides.
I can't answer that question, unfortunately. I did have a whole couple of slides on the colors. There are distinctive colors that are characteristic of different tribes. There's a Cheyenne pink, and there are ranges of colors, but I don't feel I have the expertise to describe that now. But it is a really important question. I'm kind of looking at Early Dawn to see if she's going to help me out at all, but I don't have to.
That's fair.
I don't want to put you on the spot. There are so many details that we just couldn't, that are kind of a little bit outside the scope of what this talk was about. So, yeah.
I may have misunderstood you, but I thought in the beginning of this talk you said that you offered the community opportunity to keep some of the items.
Yes.
Did they take you up on that?
No, not yet. But that doesn't have to be a very immediate response. It may be that over time and thinking about things, that there will be a request to have things returned. And we're actually in a conversation with members of the Northwest, the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe. I'm not giving you their proper family affiliation, but as a general statement. Members of that community were here as part of the Building Bridges project, and there are 3 items from the museum that they would like to have returned. And so we're building a project with them that's kind of helping set some guidelines for how those returns are described and carried out and planned. But we're happy to do it. Yeah. And I think somebody had a question back there, yeah.
At least I can catch. Might not be able to throw.
Thank you. What is the goal of conservation? We are looking, for example, at the glass beads that are deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
Is the goal to see the deterioration, or is the goal to restore it to what it once was, or is the goal to leave it the way that you have it at this point?
It's a really crucial question, and it depends to a great extent on the context. So, and there are conversations, say, to be had about the beads in the Southern Plains Beadwork collection. I would advocate, or will advocate, for cleaning to the extent that we can to curtail any further damage. And I would say so far that's consistent with the feedback we got when we were in Oklahoma, to not interfere, but to stop further deterioration. In other settings, it might be a very different thing. So when I've worked on decorative art collections, the goal is to have the item look as much like it did when it was done, when it was first made, as possible. There's sort of this 6-inch, 6-foot rule, and I've never quite understood what that means. But from afar, you can't tell, and close up, you can. But also document it so that it's known. But really, the point of the decorative arts item is to have it look a certain way, not to look repaired. With material culture, with cultural heritage materials, it's the experience of that item that you're also protecting. So I think with the glass beads on these items, it's to stop it from getting worse and further harming that item. Unless someone from the community were to come in and say, that you should be letting this go. This is the way it's meant to pass through. And so that's the instruction that I would advocate following. And usually we are working with curators there's either a direct, the curator, we go back and forth with them, or if it's with a community that's not in the museum, then that's a conversation together. But it's a very different, which from art type from object type to art type. What are you working with? What are you preserving? What are you sharing? But I appreciate the question, because we have to ask that in a different way when we're stewards of another culture. Yeah. Maybe one more, and then well, of course you get to. Oh, and then it's after 8, so I don't want to keep everybody forever. But please.
Just a quick question. Most of these beads, in fact, are European beads. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
That they were produced in Italy and places like that.
Yeah.
And when
in
folks like
Germany.
Lewis and Clark went across the country, they had beads that they traded for whatever. It's kind of fascinating for me to think of this sort of cross-cultural part of this, and how Native folks kind of thought about these objects that came to them that weren't really something that they were able to manufacture within their own culture.
Yeah, I feel that way about my car.
Yeah, right.
But I think, you're striving to make something glorious.
Well, I'm just saying
wow, glass beads or red trade cloth, and as I said.
Well, it's just fascinating.
It is,
too,
yeah.
That
so much
opportunities
trade.
go both directions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was so much exchange, so much travel that we don't think about as having happened.
Right.
Because it was before us. So how could that have happened?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Terry, you want to ask?
Yes, perfect.
Then that'll be it, and I'll free you from.
Sorry, Casey.
No, please.
And this is, I'm sure, beyond the scope of what you're talking about, but I'm just curious, thinking about other indigenous communities that have an association with Colorado. Do the Utes or Southern Utes have a beadwork tradition?
I don't know, because I haven't worked with the Ute community. I really don't. I'm sorry to say. Yes,
They do, okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I keep deferring to friends and colleagues for answers, but my knowledge is so narrow, and it's why I really feel I'm like reporting on something, and so many people in this project have so much more to bring to the table. But it's like everything, all these different communities of people, so doing different things. Anyway, now I can't talk anymore, so it's time for us to stop. But thank you so much.